Hello again. James Orr in Sidelights on Christian Doctrine is tackling the issue of how do we deal with evolution in the context of the biblical fall. Here then we come to a crucial point. There is no doubt that this which I have called the Bible doctrine about man's original state goes right across the track of a great deal of our modern speculation about man's origin and primitive moral condition. The teaching of most of our modern evolutionists on this point is well known and has already been hinted at. Man has sprung from some species of anthropoid ape, not now existing, and through favorable variations, natural selection, and survival of the fittest, through immensely long periods of time, has been gradually changed into the image he now bears. Thus God introduced man into the world. He begins way down below anything we would now call man. He is a semi-animal, immersed in brutishness, ruled and swayed by unbridled passions, only a glimmering of reason shedding its fitful ray across the chaotic deep of his soul. This is the primitive man science would have us accept. Many who advocate these views speak much of the fatherhood of God. There's a strange idea of fatherhood which can accommodate itself to this conception. Is God the father of man, or is he of the ape also? Where does the fatherhood come in? What would be thought of as any earthly father who started his children off in similar conditions? The difficulties of accepting such a view, even from the moral standpoint, seem insuperable. Such a being, as the scientists suppose, is not only in a non-moral condition, he is in an unmoral condition, which is also an immoral one. For morality undeniably has to do with states of soul as well as with actions. It asks for a pure and harmonious state of the moral affections and an upright condition of the moral will. Of all this, the theory before us is the negation. I need not say further that the acceptance of such a theory as the above will alter the whole trend of our theology. Men may well call it a new theology because through such a theory everything in theology gets changed. Sin, it will be found, changes its character and loses its gravity and heinousness. Guilt, in the scriptural sense, practically disappears. For how can God condemn that which is the direct and necessary result of his own handiwork in man? Instead of speaking of the fall of man, it is now necessary to speak of the rise of man. The fall is a fall upwards. Instead of blaming man for what he is, and speaking of a divine condemnation resting on the race, we can only marvel at the marvelous progress man has made by his own efforts. The old idea of redemption must be given up, and Christ be viewed simply as the apex of a universal revolutionary process. The question, however, in the end comes to be, is the theory true? There is no use in meeting theories which claim to be based on scientific grounds with denunciation and ridicule. The theory must be faced with facts, if satisfaction is to be brought to thinking minds. The thing wanted is the truth, and if appeal is made to facts, are not anthropology and evolution against us? On this point, as I said before, I have no quarrel with the doctrine of evolution as such, only with certain forms of it. I have no quarrel with that doctrine so far as it is scientifically established. But this I do say with great confidence, that within the limits in which it has been shown to have real scientific basis, evolution does not compel us to accept any such doctrine of the origin and primitive state of man as I have described. Evolution, as I said earlier, is not Darwinism, and the Darwinian idea of the production of man by slow gradations from lower ape-like forms is one which I think is being discredited on scientific grounds. Evolution, it is coming to be seen with greater clearness, has its well-marked limits. Not only must it always be regarded as having behind it creative, organizing intelligence, working in and through it, but it must make room within its process for the introduction of new potencies, new factors, which can only be referred directly to the great creative cause. And creative cause he has capitalized as a kind of a pseudonym for God. Now there are evolutionists, not a few, who take this ground in respect of man's mind. Man's mind, they tell us, cannot be accounted for without a special cause. but they think his body can. They hand over the body to the laws of evolution and bring in a creative cause, capital C's again, to explain the mind. I have always felt that there is a logical inconsistency in this supposition. There is such a connection between man's body and man's mind, between mind and organization, that the idea of an abrupt rise on the side of mind without a corresponding rise of organism is utterly untenable. Allow, as many evolutionists do, that God's power must be brought in to explain the mind of man, then you cannot take the mind and put it into the brain of an anthropoid ape. You need a brain which will be a suitable receptacle for it. If a rise takes place on the spiritual side, you must have a corresponding rise on the organic side. In other words, you must postulate the founding of a new order of things, a new kingdom in humanity, both on the spiritual and on the bodily side. This just brings us back to the old Bible doctrine of God's creation of man. When, moreover, you turn to science, you find that the facts bear out what is here alleged. It is vain to speak of science demonstrating the slow development of man from the anthropoid ape, for it does no such thing. There is no proof of this in science up till the present hour. There is no evidence of any such gradual process. Keep in mind this is 1909. Things haven't much changed in 100 years. There is no evidence of any such gradual process. On the contrary, there remains in nature an abrupt fall from the human brain to the ape brain. Or putting it the other way, sudden rise from the ape brain to the human brain, which science cannot bridge over and which corresponds to the mental and spiritual rise in man. Go back as far as you like, take the oldest skulls yet found. You will find the poorest of them matched by human skulls of today, while some are skulls which, as Huxley said, might have contained the brains of a philosopher. We hear indeed from time to time of the discovery of the missing link. There was the famous Java case, the best yet produced, but scientific men of the highest rank early pronounced its claims unfounded. I close then by repeating that so far as knowledge goes, there is no fact in science which comes into conflict with the Bible doctrine of the origin of man, or with the doctrine of the original purity of man. For anything science has to say to the contrary, man may have come from the hand of its creator, truly bearing his image, and a state of intellectual soundness and moral integrity, as the Bible declares he did. And if he is now found otherwise, it can only be ascribed to his voluntary disobedience, to a fall. I have spoken of these ancient skulls and of the antiquity assigned to some of them. We read in books of 500,000 years or 200,000 years as the period of man's abode upon earth. There is no need for Christian people taking alarm at these exaggerated estimates. Science itself is rapidly retrenching them. Careful calculations based on the rate of retrocession of Niagara Falls and on similar facts show that these immense periods must be cut down to quite reasonable dimensions. But this is an aspect of the subject on which it is unnecessary to dwell. Now, a lot of this would have to be revised in the light of modern discoveries, but the idea that man is 1 million, 2 million years old, these ideas that float very commonly in the general culture. Civilization, as far as we know, still goes back only a few thousand years. So his reference to the Niagara escarpment here in the Niagara Falls River, the falls itself, the calculations I remember when I was doing my Ice Age geography studies way back in, grade 7 or 8, those calculations that had once thought that Niagara Falls was formed in something like 30,000 BC during the Ice Age, and then that number gradually came down to more like 10,000. I haven't kept up with it, but it shows the transience or the flexibility of the figures. That all of that happened before civilization as we know it. The building of cities, the invention of language and writing. So what Orr basically says here, although it would have to be revisited in terms of detail, is still sound. Civilization is a few thousand years old. Man is supposed to be, well, at least 1 million years old if you go by the estimates of anthropology. There's a discrepancy. So next time, sin. Man is a sinner. Man has a need as a sinner. And I'm putting a link on your screen to what Genesis says about death. It's a playlist, actually, starting in Genesis chapter 2, with what is the biblical definition of death, and what does that say to this doctrine of man's original condition. That's a playlist called What J.W. Org is Not Telling You About Death and Life.